He stood there, Michael, my son, raising a glass of champagne. His smile was perfectly trimmed, glittering beneath the chandeliers. $8,000 a month, he announced to a room full of Dallas executives. That's what I give my father so he can live comfortably. Applause thundered. But I, in a borrowed suit with only $317 in my account, caught a look. The hard, glassy glint in my daughter-in-law Sophia's eyes. A silent dare, old man, play your part. Go on, try telling the truth. In that moment, I knew. They thought I was a prop. They were wrong. I was the audience. And the real play was only just beginning. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? I stood there in a suit I borrowed from the neighbor, sleeves a touch too long and the collar a bit too tight, feeling like a bit player shoved on stage without knowing the lines. My son, Michael, lifted his champagne flute, his smile trimmed as perfectly as the hedges on his Highland Park street. This was his world, one built on glossy surfaces and promises spoken into microphones. I've gotten good at noticing the hairline cracks other people miss. Like 6 months ago, when I quietly paid off his American Express balance, unexpected startup costs, he caught it. He thanked me with a pat on the shoulder and a promise that one day I'll pay you back. Or the way my daughter-in-law, Sophia, admired the marble island in their brand new kitchen. The one my final retirement bonus from the telecom paid for and sighed. Finally, a place that's truly ours. She didn't say thank you. She accepted it as a given. Sophia was the one who insisted I come to this charity gala. Richard, it would mean so much to Michael if you were there, she said over the phone, voice sweet as honey. Tonight, I understood. My presence did matter, just not in the way I'd imagined. I was part of the backdrop, a necessary prop for the performance. The ballroom at the Adolphus was thick with expensive perfume, and something else, the smell of deals struck in whispers, of arrangements made in the dark. It reminded me of the oily coolant in a used car office. Even the laughter here sounded different. It wasn't warm. It glittered and cut, like shards of glass under the chandeliers. I looked at the Patek Philippe on Michael's wrist, the watch I bought by selling Martha's last parcel of land after she passed, my gift when he graduated from SMU. He once called it his good luck charm. Tonight, it was just another accessory, nothing more than a credential for this room. Sophia swept past, her flawless manicure grazing the tired polyester of my borrowed jacket. You look sharp, Richard, she said, but her eyes slid over my shoulder, already hunting for someone who mattered. Her hug felt hollow, a bit of stage business for the wealthy neighbors standing nearby. I knew tonight the crack was about to split wide open. That morning, before leaving my dingy rental, I checked my bank account. The number on the screen read $317.52. That was my anchor of reality in this sea of make-believe. Then Michael took the stage. The spotlight followed him, turning his tuxedo into a glossy, bottomless black. He thanked the sponsors' familiar names in Dallas oil and real estate. His voice carried confidence. His laugh was a shade too loud, a shade too bright. It was the sound of a man plastering over a deep foundation crack. And then, naturally, he turned toward me. And of course, he said, dropping his voice into a practiced hush, I wouldn't be here without the sacrifices of great men. My father, Richard Bell. Every eye swung my way. I felt like a museum piece, an artifact from a bygone age labeled parental sacrifice. Judge Miller nodded at me. I could almost hear his thought, there's a good young man. He takes care of his father. Everyone loves a good story. Michael tells them beautifully. That's why. Michael went on, lifting his glass higher. I'm proud to make sure he enjoys a comfortable retirement. $8,000 a month is the least I can do. The room exploded in applause. But just before the roar, there was a half second of silence. The moment when the room collectively decides to believe a pretty lie instead of an awkward truth. They weren't clapping for filial piety. They were applauding their own illusion of a world where success and virtue always hold hands. 8,000. I thought of the can of stew I'd eaten last night. The 1,983 Ford Fairmont with a busted heater sitting in the employee lot. The dull ache in my back from the late shift mopping a warehouse floor in the design district. The number $317.52. What changed in me wasn't shock. It was a cold confirmation. All the vague misgivings and slow, needling pains of the last few years hardened into a single, obvious, undeniable truth. I had been turned into a parabolite wrapped in champagne. Michael's arm settled onto my shoulder, a gesture staged for the crowd. I didn't look at him. I looked at Sophia. She stood at his side, raising her glass toward me. A smile like cut glass lifted her lips. Under the chandelier's light, her eyes held no warmth, only the cool glint of triumph. A dare, as if she knew I would stay quiet, as if she were baiting me to speak. At 57, you learn that the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the child you once carried on your shoulders. And I realized this wasn't a careless lie. It was a well-rehearsed act. I had just been shoved into the starring role of my own tragedy. My silence wasn't acceptance. It was the moment a detective recognizes he's finally found the decisive piece of evidence. My quiet investigation was about to begin. I left the gala without anyone noticing a ghost in a borrowed suit. Up on the roof, the December air in Dallas felt like absolution. I wasn't drowning in sorrow. I was working. The shock had burned off, replaced by a frightening clarity. Tonight's lie wasn't the beginning. It was confirmation. Back in my rental on Fitzhugh, where the smell of bleach from my work clothes still hung in the air, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and started sketching a map in my head, a map of cracks. I pulled out the old shoebox my wife, Martha, used for important papers. The second mortgage on our house in Oak Cliff, Michael's SMU admission letter, Martha's final medical bills. Each sheet was a shard of sacrifice. Paper doesn't lie, it just waits for the right reader. I found Martha's little ledger, where she'd once tracked every expense with care. I flipped to the last blank pages and began a timeline. I connected the dots. I laid out the paperwork from his divorce with his first wife, Jana. I remembered paying his attorney's fees. He called it a loan that never came back. I marked the dates. Then the day Michael met Sophia. That's when things began to change. The money request grew subtler and much bigger. No more, "Dad, can I borrow a few hundred?" but talk of investment opportunities and tax efficiency. Why did Michael only start talking about complex vehicles after he met her? Why was she always conveniently present when the large sums were discussed, sitting there with that knowing silence? I remember her telling Michael at the family dinner, "Michael's too kind. He needs to learn to be tougher in business." That wasn't advice. It was instruction. I replayed the rooftop encounter with a new lens. I wasn't a shocked victim anymore. I was an investigator assessing a witness. When Sophia approached, her voice syrup sweet, "Richard, are you all right?" I didn't just hear the false concern. I heard the probing. She was sizing me up, deciding whether I was a loose link in her well-oiled machine. "I'm fine," I remember saying, keeping my voice level. Just thinking, $8,000 is a big number. Must be quite a sophisticated set of books. Her smile snagged for a heartbeat, a tiny crack on the polished surface. I had tossed a pebble into her still pond. "Oh, Richard, you don't need to trouble yourself with those details. At your age, numbers can be so confusing." When she said, "at your age," it wasn't care. It was a move. She was putting me in a box, labeled old and unreliable. She was neutralizing me before I could speak. Smart and ruthless. I decided to press. "That figure," I asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Was that your idea, Sophia?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw it. Not confidence, but worry. A flash of panic that vanished as quickly as it came. She recovered too fast. "Of course not," she laughed, cold as ice. "Michael is the most generous man I've ever known. Family is everything, Richard," she said, stepping closer, her whisper edged like a threat. It would be such a shame if anything disturbed the harmony. When she walked away, I had what I needed. Confirmation. Michael might be the liar, but Sophia was the architect of the lie. The son I raised might have lost his way, but this woman had given him the map and pointed the route. I came back to the present, to my dark apartment. The pain of betrayal hardened into a cold focus. Feelings were a luxury I couldn't afford now. I was on assignment. I turned a fresh page in Martha's ledger. With a steady hand, I wrote a single name across the blank. Sophia. An empire built on image always has its attendants, the ones who sweep the stage after each act. And servants know more than they are allowed to say. They see bills torn in haste, hear whispered arguments behind closed doors. They are the house's ghosts, the invisible ones. And I knew that to fight people who lived in the spotlight, I would need the ally from the dark. My first ally was not a lawyer or a private eye. It was Maria, the housekeeper who had worked for Michael since they were newlyweds. She smelled of laundry soap and honest exhaustion. Her handshake was firm, nothing like Sophia's perfunctory touch. There was nothing performative about her. I did not go to the house, where every ornament felt like a taunt at my thrift. I waited, patient as an angler, at the bus stop near their neighborhood on a Thursday afternoon. I knew that was the day she left early for church. She was startled to see me sitting on the bench, a folded old newspaper in my hands. Mr. Bell? Hello, Maria, I said, smiling. Small world, isn't it? K for R. Libby. We sat with the roar of engines and the smell of diesel. But the silence between us felt cleaner than any air in that $1 million house. I didn't dive straight in. I asked about her children in El Salvador. I asked about her church. Then I mentioned Martha, my wife. Martha spoke so highly of you, I said softly. She always said you were the only one in that house with a true heart. Her eyes filled. A tear traced the path down the ridge of a well-worn cheek. La señora fue buena, un ángel, she whispered in Spanish. She was, I said. She would never understand these things. She trusted too easily. I left a pause so the words could settle. Maria, I'm just an old man. Maybe I'm senile, as people say. But I don't understand where the money goes. I saw the struggle in her face, a small storm of fear, loyalty, and suppressed anger. Loyalty to a job that fed her family, and hatred for what she had to witness daily. She would not speak outright. She began to tell me about how the lady of the house, Sophia, had recently replaced all the dishes in the kitchen. She said they no longer fit her new aesthetic, Maria recounted, voice steady. I understood the meaning. People, like dishes, could be discarded when they no longer fit. They seem to live very well, I said, staring into the space between us. Yes, Maria answered, barely audible. The senora, she has many companies. Companies? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Michael never mentioned any. Maria glanced around though. The bus stop was empty. She pulled a small pen and a napkin from her pocket. She covered her hand like a child hiding a test. It was the reflex of someone who lived too long under a quiet, small despotism, where every wall has ears. She scribbled 3 scrawled letters. ST Holdings. She pushed the scrap toward me. Sometimes, she whispered, eyes down. The expensive things, the things for the senora, the bills are paid by this company, not from a personal account. I nodded, folded the paper carefully, and tucked it into my pocket. ST Holdings, I repeated, committing the name to memory. It was a gift, a dangerous one. Maria, I said, seriously, you don't need to do anything more. You've already helped me plenty. I looked straight at her. I won't let anything happen to you because of this. I promise. Her buzz arrived. The hiss of brakes broke the quiet. She rose without another word and gave a faint nod. As she climbed the board, I saw a burden lift from her thin shoulders, and another, heavier burden settle onto mine. This fight was no longer only mine. I had to be careful now, not just for myself, but for the safety of the brave woman who had trusted an old man at a bus stop. The crumpled napkin in my pocket felt as heavy as a bar of gold. C Holdings. Those 3 words were the first key, but I knew I couldn't pry this door open by myself. It was time to call in an expert. Patrick Lowe's office sat in an unassuming building near downtown, a far cry from the glass and steel suites of Michael's world. The air there smelled of stale coffee and paper, the odor of real legal fights. This was no longer a casual meeting between old friends. When I set the napkin down on his oak desk, the room tightened, attentive. Maria, their housekeeper, gave me this. I said. Patrick nodded without question. He understood the risk. He turned his monitor toward me. All right, Richard, let's see what we can find. His keystrokes were purposeful and efficient. He logged into the Texas Secretary of State's public records. Every click felt like turning over a stone and revealing something that had been crawling beneath. Here, he said, ST Holdings, LLC, a limited liability company. Was not. Sophia's name appeared on the formation documents, her maiden name, Torres. The registered address was a P.O. box at a UPS store in University Park. Date of formation, 6 weeks after their wedding. 6 weeks. A classic shell company, Patrick murmured, eyes glued to the screen. No office, no employees, just a name on paper, so money can flow through. Next, he pulled up the Dallas County property records. He typed ST Holdings into the owner field. A result populated. An address appeared on the screen. A penthouse at the Azure, one of Dallas's most luxurious towers. I knew that building. I had driven past it and wondered who lived in places like that. Patrick clicked into the transaction record. Paid in full. Cash. He whispered, incredulous. In March, 2 years ago. I swallowed hard. March, 2 years ago, that was exactly 1 week after I sold the house Martha and I had built with our own hands and handed Michael the money he said would shore up working capital for his struggling business. My private grief now had an address, an apartment number, and a price that stole my breath. Patrick kept digging. A late model Range Rover showed up, also registered to ST Holdings. Then he began cross-checking dates. He flipped through the photos I'd taken from Michael's checkbook. Look at this, Richard, he said, pointing at the screen. Here's an $8,000 check payable to S. Torres, dated May 1. And here, a homeowners association payment for the Azure, nearly $3,000, paid out of ST Holdings account on May 3. Money in, money out. Too clean, too perfect. I sat there feeling a cold validation. I was no longer an old man imagining conspiracies. I was a victim with evidence. My emotion wasn't elation. It was the heavy weight of truth. Patrick leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. We've got her, Richard. We have proof of an elaborate financial scheme. This isn't just lying. This is a crime. What do we do next? I asked hoarsely. This is the tip of the iceberg, he said, voice turning serious. These are public records. To see what's underneath, we'll need subpoenas to get bank accounts. And to obtain subpoenas, we need something indisputable to convince a prosecutor. He looked me square in the eye. We have evidence on Sophia. But for the system to move, they'll want to see Michael. They need proof he knew was complicit. Otherwise, he can easily pin everything on his wife, say he was too busy with business, and entrusted the finances to her. Another bit of truth. To bring down the queen, I'd have to prove the king was a traitor. How? I asked. How do we get that proof? Patrick was quiet for a moment. You're going to have to talk to him, Richard. And this time, we must make sure everything he says is recorded. That afternoon, Patrick's office became a rehearsal stage. He sat across from me, playing Michael. I was myself, or rather, the version of myself Michael wanted to believe was real. Don't accuse, Patrick coached, his voice firm. Act confused. Let him fill the gaps with his lies. He'll want to talk down to his senile old man. Let him do that. We ran it over and over. I learned how to make my voice tremble naturally. I learned how to ask innocent-sounding questions that hid deadly traps. Patrick kept repeating Texas law. As long as you are party to the conversation, it's legal. Let him talk. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. I took the little digital recorder I'd bought from the electronics store out of its box. I read the manual twice. I installed the batteries, turned it on, recorded my own voice, then played it back. I checked it 3 times. The small device held the weight of everything to come. I breathed deep and dialed Michael. My heart hammered like a sledge. This was not just a call. It was a calculated act of betrayal. A necessary one. Hello? Michael's voice came through, slightly impatient. I hit record. A tiny red dot glowed. I cleared my throat and forced a weak, shaky sound. I pictured the image he wanted, an old, bewildered man. I hated myself for it in that moment, but I knew the cost. Michael, it's Dad, I said, voice faltering. Dad? What's up? I'm busy. Sorry to bother you, but I'm in little trouble. I paused, letting the silence widen. There's a letter from TXU Energy about the heating bill. It's red saying they're gonna cut it off. I don't know what to do. I heard a huff on the other end, condescension, exactly as Patrick had predicted. Dad, how many times have I told you? You don't need to worry about that stuff. Ivry's sayings offer Embry. But the letter, look, Dad, he began his lecture. Finances are complicated. I've set up things to protect the family's assets long term. There are trusts, structures. You don't see the money directly, but you're taken care of. All the bills are paid. A trust? I asked, feigning innocent confusion. But I never signed anything. You did, years ago. Don't you remember? Come on, Dad. Don't make this harder. There it was, the trap. I eased the line. But I don't understand, Michael. Is that trust tied into Sophia's companies? I've seen her paperwork. There's this odd name, some company, ST something. I held my breath. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought he hung up. I could almost hear the wheels in his head spinning, scrambling for another lie. Dad, he finally said, a sliver of doubt in his voice. Those are complicated arrangements to protect family assets. Sophia just helps manage a few things so things run smoothly. That's why I pay her. You don't need to worry. The fish had taken the bait. Pays her? He hadn't only acknowledged a link, he'd invented a cover story. The money as salary to Sophia. A lie stacked on a lie. Perfect. Oh, I said, voice still trembling. So, what about the heating bill? I'll call them, he replied, regaining his superiority. Don't worry, go rest. He hung up. I sat in the dark room, the recorder in my hand. The red dot still glowed. I pressed stop. There was no triumph, only a cold, hollow emptiness. I had what we needed, the smoking gun Patrick had described. But to get it, I had turned my own voice into a snare. I had weaponized the weakness he had trained me to play. Patrick later explained. The tape alone wasn't a silver bullet, but it was a catalyst. It connected Michael to other evidence. It showed intent to conceal. It gave a prosecutor cause to look for fire where there was smoke. In that moment, though, I did not think of prosecutors. I thought of the son I had just baited. I wondered if anything would be left to save after the trap snapped shut. I had crossed an ethical line. I had won an important battle, but I understood now that this victory carried a cost to my soul. I was no spotless hero. I was a father doing a painful thing that had to be done. The recording on my phone sat like a ticking bomb. Patrick and I were in a windowless conference room at the Dallas District Attorney's office. The air was thick with seriousness. Across from us sat Jennifer Martinez, an assistant prosecutor younger than I expected, but with eyes that had the sharpness of someone who'd seen too many lies. I told the story again, this time under the cold light of the law. Patrick laid out the documents. ST Holdings formation records, the penthouse purchase, the photos of the checkbook. Finally, he set my phone on the table and hit play. My weak, confused voice filled the room, followed by Michael's impatient, condescending tone. When the recording ended, Jennifer was silent for a long moment. She only tapped her pen against the file. All right, she said at last. We'll open a preliminary investigation. This will take time, Mr. Bell. You'll have to be patient. I nodded, but I knew patience was a luxury. Outside that building, under Dallas's gray sky, I turned to Patrick. The law moves slow, Richard, he said, as if reading my mind. But reputations die fast. Their kingdom is built on reputation. That's where we strike first. I had been thinking along those lines. I knew exactly whom to target. Margaret Walsh, I said. Patrick raised an eyebrow. Margaret Walsh was a Dallas social queen, the widow of an oil baron and chair of the Future Children Fund, one of the city's most prestigious charities, a place Sophia was angling to sit on the board. She hates anyone who sullies the charity's name, I explained. She treats the fund's reputation as her own. That afternoon, I went to a public library in a part of town I didn't know. Using one of the public terminals, I created a throwaway email, something anonymous, bland, John Smith 1958. I composed a short, emotionless message. Truth doesn't need adjectives. Dear Miss Walsh, I wrote, as an admirer of the Future Children Fund's work, I thought you, as its chair, should know how one prospective board candidate, Miss Sophia Bell, handles family finances. I believe transparency is the foundation of trust in charitable work. Sincerely, a concerned party. I made no accusations. I only planted a seed of doubt. I attached 3 files, not everything I had, just enough. Attachment 1, a clear scan of a check showing an $8,000 payment to S. Torres, is a brave friend masked. Attachment 2, a redacted bank statement, with only a name and an ending balance of $317.52 visible. Attachment 3, the first page of the penthouse property record showing ownership by ST Holdings. I read the email once more. Then I took a breath and hit send. The click echoed in the library's hush. I logged out, cleared the browser history, and left. I had lit a silent time bomb. Now it was only a matter of waiting. The wait lasted 4 days. During those 4 days, I lived with a strange tension, constantly refreshing the Dallas Society site's Paper City D magazine. Then, on Friday morning, it happened. A small item appeared on the blogger's column covering the social set. Rumors are swirling in Dallas's philanthropic circles after word of a surprise internal audit at the Future Children Fund. A source close to the matter says Chair Margaret Walsh is reviewing vetting procedures for board candidates and major donors after receiving sensitive information. I read that snippet again and again. No names were mentioned, but I knew the first domino had fallen. They would likely look for a direct hit, a lawsuit, a scandal. They would never suspect the first weapon I used was an anonymous email and the vigilance of an old rich woman. Sometimes, the best way to topple a skyscraper isn't with explosives, but by undermining its foundation. I had prodded the hornet's nest. I knew the backlash would come, but for the first time in a long while, I did not feel afraid. I felt a new kind of power. I was no longer merely reacting. I was the one moving the pieces on the board. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking. Like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you, and where are you listening? The recording on my phone had become a ticking time bomb. Patrick and I sat in a windowless conference room at the Dallas District Attorney's office, the air heavy with gravity. Across from us was Jennifer Martinez, an assistant prosecutor younger than I'd expected, but with eyes that had the hard edge of someone who's seen too many lies. I told the story again, this time under the cold light of the law. Patrick spread the documents on the table. ST Holdings formation papers, the penthouse deed, the photographs of Michael's checkbook. Finally, he set my phone down and hit play. My thin, bewildered voice filled the room, then Michael's impatient, condescending tone. When the recording ended, Jennifer was silent for a long moment, only tapping her pen against the file. "All right," she said at last. "We'll open a preliminary investigation. This will take time, Mr. Bell. You'll need to be patient." I nodded, but patience is a luxury. Leaving that building under a gray Dallas sky, I turned to Patrick. "The law moves slow, Richard," he said, reading me like a book. "But reputations die fast. Their kingdom is built on reputation. That's where we hit first." Wonder Wong. I'd been thinking along the same lines. I knew my target. "Margaret Walsh," I said. Patrick arched an eyebrow. Margaret Walsh was a Dallas social queen, the widow of an oil magnate, chair of the Future Children Fund, one of the city's most prestigious charities, and exactly the kind of woman Sophia was angling to sit beside on the board. "She hates anything that sullies the charity's name," I explained. "She treats the fund's reputation as if it were her own." And that afternoon, I went to a public library in a part of town I didn't know. At the terminal, I created a throwaway email, something bland, anonymous, John Smith 1958. I wrote a short, clinical note. "Truth doesn't need adjectives. Dear Miss Walsh," I typed. "As an admirer of the Future Children Fund's work, I thought you, as chair, should be aware of how one prospective board candidate, Miss Sophia Bell, handles family finances. Transparency is the foundation of trust in charitable work. Sincerely, a concerned party." I made no accusations. I planted a seed of doubt. I attached 3 files, not everything I had, just enough. Attachment 1, a clear scan of a check showing $8,000 paid to S. Torres. Attachment 2, a redacted bank statement, leaving only a name and an ending balance of $317.52. Attachment 3, the first page of the penthouse property, record showing ST Holdings as owner. I read the email once more, took a breath, and hit send. The click echoed in the hush of the library. I logged out, cleared the browser history, and left. I'd lit a silent fuse. Now I had to wait. The wait lasted 4 days. I lived those days in a taut state, constantly refreshing Dallas society sites, Paper City, D Magazine. Then, on Friday morning, it arrived, a small item on the social columnist blog. Rumors are circulating in Dallas philanthropic circles after reports of a surprise internal audit at the Future Children Fund. A source close to the matter says, Chair Margaret Walsh is reviewing vetting procedures for board candidates and major donors after receiving sensitive information. I read it over and over. No names were mentioned. But I knew the first domino had fallen. They would probably aim for a headline-grabbing takedown. They would never guess my first weapon was an anonymous email and the vigilance of an old rich woman. Sometimes, the best way to topple a skyscraper isn't with explosives, but by undermining its foundation. I had prodded the hornet's nest. I knew the backlash would come. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt a new kind of power. I was no longer merely reacting. I was moving the pieces. Alan's USB felt like the final key. Patrick and I handed over to Jennifer Martinez. The next day she called. Her voice was cool and professional, stripped of any feeling. "We've got enough, Mr. Bell," she said. The emails clearly show intent. Search warrants have been signed. They'll execute them at 6 a.m. tomorrow, simultaneously at their home and their office. I thanked her. My hand trembled slightly around the phone. I set the machine in motion. I could no longer stop. The next morning, I didn't go to the warehouse. I didn't go to the grocery store. I sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee gone cold and turned on the local news, WFAA. I didn't feel gloat. I was simply a spectator, watching the history as it started to play out on the TV. And then the bulletin came. We're live in the upscale Highland Park neighborhood. The reporter said, standing behind yellow police tape, where agents from the Dallas District Attorney's Office are executing a search warrant at the home of businessman Michael Bell. Helicopter shots filled the screen. I saw the house where I had once attended backyard barbecues. Now it looked like a crime scene. Unmarked vehicles lined the cobbled street. Men in jackets labeled "Da" carted out cardboard boxes. They reported that someone inside Margaret Walsh's charity had leaked the news to the press. It was the inevitable fallout of the social war I had started. The matter was no longer secret. It had become public theater. Then the camera on the ground zoomed in. The front door opened. Sophia emerged. She wore a jade silk robe. Her hair was a mess. The perfect makeup could not hide the raw panic in her eyes. She was shouting at the investigator, finger pointed. For the first time, I saw her without a script, without preparation. She was no longer the kingdom's sentry. She was a woman in her nightclothes, trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. On the TV, they flashed a close-up of a paper. The search warrant stamped by the court. It confirmed the legality of everything. This was not a mistake. This was justice. I did not see Michael. He was likely at the office, where a similar scene was unfolding. I turned off the TV. The silence in the apartment felt heavy. I had expected to feel something: triumph, glee, relief. I felt nothing, only emptiness. I rose, went to the window, and looked down at the street below. Ordinary people were starting their day, heading to work, dropping children at school. Their lives kept going. Only my small world had been overturned. I thought of Michael at 5, falling off his bike on the sidewalk in front of our old house. He cried, skinned his knee. I ran, scooped him up, wiped his tears, and told him everything would be all right. This time, I thought I could not lift him up. There was no gloating, only a leaden weight. I had started a machine, and now it ran by its own rules. I had wanted justice, and this was its shape: cold, efficient, with no room for feeling. It was not a victory. It was reckoning. My fight had slipped out of my hands and into the systems. I had to live with the sorrow of a winner who finally understands that justice comes with a price no one warned you about. A strange silence settled after the search. The media still hummed, but there was no fresh move from the DA's office. I knew this was a stage where lawyers began their war behind closed doors, calls, memos, floated deals. I'd become an outsider, the final spectator to a play I myself had started. I didn't need to act anymore. I only had to wait and watch the people who hurt me destroy one another. Patrick called on a rainy afternoon. "Hot tip, Richard," he said, a curl of irony in his voice. "Sophia's attorney just reached out to Jennifer. She wants a deal. She's willing to cooperate." I said nothing. Cooperate. Such a clean word for a filthy act. "What does cooperate mean?" I asked. "It means she's throwing Michael under the bus to save herself," Patrick said flatly. Exactly. A few days later, Patrick relayed the story Sophia spun for the prosecutors. It was a masterpiece of deceit. In her version, she was just a loving wife, a woman clueless about business, innocently following Michael's financial directives without understanding. She trusted too much. The checks to S. Torres, Michael's idea of salary for household management to optimize taxes. ST Holdings, a company Michael set up and put in her name for complex legal reasons. She knew nothing about the penthouse. She believed it was a company investment property. She cried in the interview room, Patrick said, unable to hide his contempt. Professional tears. She painted herself as a manipulated wife, swept up in her husband's ambition. She cast herself as another victim. I listened without anger, only with a cold disgust. I already knew her nature. There was no surprise left, only a tally of her inversions. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity for Michael, my foolish son. He sacrificed his own father for this woman, and now she was the first to shove him over the edge. But Sophia's game didn't end there. She thought she could manipulate the legal system the way she'd manipulated my son. She was wrong. While Sophia performed her victim monologue, Jennifer Martinez, the sharp prosecutor, didn't sit still. The social war I'd sparked, the articles about my case, sent out ripples I hadn't fully foreseen. Patrick called again a week later, this time unable to mask his excitement. "Richard, you won't believe this. They found someone else." Someone else? Another victim of Sophia, before Michael. It turned out a man named Howard Gable in Fort Worth had read the coverage. The name Sophia Bell, paired with talk of murky investments, jolted him. He recognized the script. Years earlier, when Sophia was single and still using Taurus, she charmed him, a wealthy widower, into investing in a phantom real estate venture. Once she got a large sum, she vanished. Too ashamed to admit he'd been duped by a younger woman, Gable kept quiet, until now. My story gave him courage. He contacted the prosecutor's office himself. Jennifer dropped that ace right in the middle of Sophia's performance, Patrick said. She simply placed a signed statement from Mr. Gable on the table and asked, "Do you recognize this script, Miss Bell?" Sophia's act closed on the spot. The new witness's testimony obliterated her defenses. It showed she wasn't a follower, she was a practiced architect, a serial predator. In trying to save herself, she dug her own grave deeper. The irony was perfect. The circle was closing. I felt an odd relief. My fight hadn't only freed me, it had accidentally delivered justice to another man who'd stayed silent for years. I realized that once truth is set loose, it has a power of its own. It finds its way into the darkest corners and drags things into the light. Now both Michael and Sophia were back to the wall. No more lies to hide behind, no one left to blame, only the raw truth and a trial waiting. I wondered, after everything, facing an unavoidable collapse, whether my son would ever look back and understand the price of what he'd done. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Judgment Day came on an April morning, when bluebonnets were spilling along the Texas highways like purple-blue carpets. The sky was ruthlessly clear, a near-mocking contrast to the gloom inside the marble courthouse. I wore a new suit, one I'd bought myself, sleeves just right, collar not choking me. A small detail, but it mattered. After weeks of testimony, the courtroom had become eerily familiar. I knew the dry cough of the old lawyer in the front row, The way the morning light fell through the tall windows and drew a long band across the floor. I'd given my testimony days earlier. Under Jennifer's guidance, I told the story calmly, clinically. I didn't use words like pain or betrayal. I simply laid out facts, figures, dates. I let the documents tell their own tale. When Michael's defense attorney tried to corner me, asked if I was jealous of my son's success, I looked him straight in the eye. "Sir," I said, my voice steady, "I spent my life pouring the foundation for his success. A mason doesn't envy a house. He grieves when he sees it built on false ground. Today I was only a spectator, seated in the front row beside Patrick. I saw Michael at the defense table, his expensive suit now looking like a costume in the wrong play. He'd lost weight. The confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. Sophia sat a careful distance away, cold and proud to the end. She looked like a statue about to be pulled down, still holding its pose. The jury filed in ordinary faces entrusted with an extraordinary task. They didn't look toward the defense table. Patrick set a hand lightly on my arm. "That's a good sign," he whispered. Then the judge read the verdict. His voice was even emotionless, as if announcing the weather. The legal words landed: fraud, conspiracy, financial exploitation of the elderly. Michael was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Sophia, identified as the architect, with emails showing intent, and Mr. Gable's testimony about her prior swindle, received 12. No shouting, no sobbing. Only a heavy silence settled over the room. I felt relief, but it wasn't joy. It was like setting down a load you've carried so long you forgot what it felt like not to bear it. Your shoulders still ache, but you know, from here on, they'll begin to heal. As they were led away, Michael didn't look at me. Perhaps that was a mercy for both of us. Outside, a thicket of cameras and microphones waited like a pack of hungry animals. Patricia placed a hand on my back. "You don't have to say anything, Richard. We can take the side exit." "No," I said. "I need to. This would be my last time facing the social gaze. This time, I'd be the one telling the story, not the subject of it." I stepped to the microphones. Flashes cracked like silent lightning. I didn't look away. I met the lenses head on. "Thank you for your attention," I began, voice steady. "Today, justice was done. But let me be clear. This story isn't about money. It's about a name that cannot be used as a tool. A father's, a mother's, a grandfather's, a grandmother's dignity is not a line item on a balance sheet." Alas, didn't moan. I paused, let the words sink in. If my story means anything, I hope it urges you to listen to the elders in your family. Ask them questions, and above all, believe them. Check the papers behind the glittering stories you're told. A name used without consent isn't love. It's theft. And silence, sometimes, is an accomplice. I took no questions. I simply nodded and walked away with Patrick and Patricia, the crowd parting like water. In the days that followed, I went back to my apartment. I sat by the phone, half expecting, half not, a call from Michael before he was processed into federal custody. An apology, an explanation, anything. The call never came, and I began to accept that some cracks never mend. Some apologies will never be spoken. The civil case wrapped quickly. The lawyers negotiated, and compensation what was taken and damages for what can't be tallied was deposited into a new account the bank opened for me. It came with a formal letter from the bank president, apologizing for procedural failures and announcing new security measures for elderly clients. A small change in a vast system, but a change nonetheless. I used part of the money to move to a small place in the Bishop Arts District. It isn't large, but it has sunlight. Morning light warms the wood floor, not cold marble. It smells like coffee and old books, not perfume and tension. From a window, I can see a little park where ordinary people live their ordinary lives. I can hear children laughing. It's a true sound, one I hadn't heard in a long while. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a handwritten card in an older woman's careful script. "Dear Mr. Bell," it read, "I'm the woman who wrote you months ago about my son-in-law controlling my finances. Your story gave me courage. Last week, my daughter and I went to the bank with a pro bono attorney from the senior center. It's resolved." My daughter cried and apologized. For the first time in 5 years, I held my own bank card again. Thank you. You gave me my life back. I read that letter many times, and it felt a warmth no verdict or payout could give. That night, I took down the old shoebox, the documents, the evidence, the clippings, Martha's ledger, the photographs, the recording. I put them in order. I didn't burn them. They're part of me, part of the road I walked, but they are not the whole of me anymore. I thought of the line I never got to say, the one I'd rehearsed 100 times. The legacy your father built is called honor. You chose to build something else. Now live in it. I slid the box deep into the closet, behind my worn shirts. When the door closed with a dry click, it wasn't the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a beginning. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the city has fallen asleep, I still hear a 5-year-old's laugh in my head, hear him call, "Dad, look," as he pedals without training wheels for the first time. The ache never vanishes. It just learns how to share a room with peace. A father's love has no off switch. It simply persists, complicated, scarred, and still there. I learned to forgive myself for staying silent too long, for not seeing sooner. I accept the past and face the future, a future I write for myself. If you're hearing this and you notice a similar crack in your family or community, I ask one thing. Don't look away. Listen, ask, believe. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a person and their dignity is the silence of a good man. And that, in the end, is the peace I found, not in anyone else's collapse, but in the freedom of living with my own truth, in sunlight, in a room no longer dark.